Before you go, tell me, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I want to know how far these forgotten stories are reaching. And if this story made you stop and think, even for a moment, hit that subscribe button. The static crackled like ice breaking. Marie Leclerc sat perfectly still at her switchboard, headset pressed tight against her right ear, fingers hovering above the patch cords. August 25th, 1944, 4:47 in the morning. The Paris Central telephone exchange smelled of burnt copper and fear. Through the leather earpiece, a German voice cut through the white noise, clipped, precise. Too quiet for orders shouted across a battlefield, too deliberate for casual conversation. Target 3, Musée du Louvre, Rue de Rivoli, 847 kilograms, primary detonation 0600 hours. Marie's breath stopped. The voice continued, reading coordinates she'd known since childhood, the same address where her father had taken her every Sunday before the war, where Jean-Paul had sketched the winged victory on his last leave, 3 days before Dunkirk swallowed him whole. Confirm placement of charges in sub-basement. Confirm wire integrity. Confirm. Her hand moved toward the disconnect jack. Protocol. Civilian operators were ordered to terminate all military traffic immediately. To listen was to risk execution. To act on what she heard was to guarantee it. But her fingers stopped. 847 kilograms of explosives. The Louvre. 6 o'clock this morning. 1 hour and 13 minutes from now. Outside the switchboard room, boots struck marble. The distinctive rhythm of Wehrmacht patrols. 2 men, maybe 3. They were on this floor. The exchange had been secured since 1940, but secured meant watched. Every operator worked under eyes that never blinked. Marie glanced at the only photograph in her workspace, Jean-Paul taped inside the switchboard panel door, where only she could see it. 26 years old forever, rifle slung across his shoulders, that stupid grin that made old women forgive him anything. His last letter, carried in her pocket until the ink had nearly vanished, had contained only 8 words that mattered. Save something beautiful. That's all we're doing. The German voice in her headset shifted to another officer. Target 4, Pont Neuf, 620 kilograms, 0615 hours. The bridges. They were going to drop the bridges into the Seine. The boots grew louder, closer, headed toward the main exchange room where she sat among 15 other operators. All women, all French, all trapped between silence and witness. Marie's training screamed at her. Disconnect, log it as interference, move to the next call. Survive the shift. Go home to her cold apartment in Belleville. Pretend she'd heard nothing. That was how you lived through occupation. You became invisible. You forgot what you heard. You saved yourself because no one else would. But the Louvre, her father's voice, a memory so old it ached. Architecture is memory made stone, Marie. When you destroy a building, you don't just remove walls. You erase everyone who ever stood inside it. The door to the exchange room opened. A German officer stepped through. Not one she recognized. Tall, narrow face, the gray-green uniform of the Wehrmacht, not the black of the SS. That meant rules, maybe. That meant someone who still believed in procedure. He scanned the room slowly. 15 women bent over their switchboards, hands moving in the mechanical dance of connection and disconnection, lights flickering across panels, the soft chorus of "Hello, connecting," and "Please hold" in French and German. His gaze landed on Marie. She didn't look up, didn't move, but her heart hammered against her ribs like a prisoner against bars. The German voice in her headset. Final confirmation. All cultural targets wired and ready. Demolition sequence begins 0600 hours. Heil Hitler. The line clicked dead. Marie's hand was still hovering over the disconnect jack. She'd been holding the connection for 43 seconds. 43 seconds of unauthorized monitoring of German military communications. 43 seconds that could end with a bullet in the basement. The officer walked closer. His boots were polished, despite the chaos outside. Despite the fact that everyone in Paris knew the Allies were coming. Despite the fact that this war was ending, one way or another. And someone had decided that if Germany couldn't have Paris, no one would. He stopped directly behind her station. Marie completed the disconnect motion, smooth and natural, as if she'd been about to do it all along. She pulled the patch cord free, logged it, 0447, military traffic, terminated per protocol. Her handwriting didn't shake. 4 years of occupation had taught her that much. Operator, the officer said in French, accented but clear. Marie turned, kept her face blank. Yes, sir. He studied her, not with suspicion, with something else. Weariness, maybe, or recognition. You've been on duty since midnight, he said. It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. Yes, sir. Long shift. Yes, sir. He glanced at her logbook, at the entry she'd just written, at the precise timestamp. Then his gaze moved to the small door of her switchboard panel, slightly ajar. To the photograph visible inside, Jean-Paul's face, his uniform, the French army insignia still clear despite 4 years and 1,000 glances. The officer's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. There's coffee in the break room, he said quietly. Cold, but coffee. Thank you, sir. He nodded once. Then he turned and walked back toward the door. His hand touched the frame. He paused. The shift ends at 0600, he said without looking back. Make sure you're gone by then. 6 o'clock, the exact minute the Louvre was scheduled to explode. The door closed behind him. Marie sat frozen. Her headset suddenly weighed 1,000 kilograms. The switchboard lights blinked red and green, innocent and patient, waiting for the next connection. In her pocket, Jean-Paul's letter was a folded square of impossible weight. Save something beautiful. 1 hour and 9 minutes until detonation. 0 radio contact with the resistance. Those lines had been cut 2 days ago. 0 authority to make international calls. Those required German military clearance. 0 chance of reaching anyone who could help in time, unless... Marie's gaze dropped to the trunk line jacks. The international routing panel. Civilians couldn't access it. Operators weren't authorized, but she knew the protocol. Her father had taught her the old routes, back when telephone exchanges were about connecting voices, not monitoring them. Paris to Reims, Reims to Brussels, Brussels to Ostend, Ostend to Dover, Dover to London, 4 occupied exchanges, 1 undersea cable, a path that shouldn't exist anymore. But if it did, if she could reach the Free French headquarters in London, if they could alert the resistance still inside Paris, if... Marie pulled out a blank routing sheet. Her hands didn't shake as she wrote the sequence. 4 exchanges. 30-plus minutes of connection time if every relay held. If no one questioned a civilian operator suddenly accessing military priority trunk lines. If the cables hadn't been cut. If the Germans monitoring traffic didn't trace the call. If. Through the window, the sky was still black. But in the east, the faintest gray was beginning to show. Dawn was coming, and with it, the end of something that had stood for 700 years. Marie looked at Jean-Paul's photograph one last time. Then she reached for the trunk line jack and pulled it free. 3 weeks earlier, Adolf Hitler had signed Paris's death warrant. The decree arrived at the Hotel Meurice on August 7th in a sealed leather portfolio. General Dietrich von Koltitz, newly appointed military governor of Paris, read it twice, then placed it face down on his desk, as if that might make the words disappear. Paris must not fall into enemy hands, or if it does, only as a field of rubble. The Führer's signature, official Reich seal, no room for interpretation. Von Koltitz was a soldier. He'd followed orders in Rotterdam, in Sebastopol. He knew what field of rubble meant. It meant explosives packed into foundations. It meant bridges collapsing into rivers. It meant 8 centuries of architecture turned to ash because one man in a bunker couldn't accept losing. By August 20th, Wehrmacht engineers had wired 32 sites: the Eiffel Tower, Notre Dame, the Palais Garnier, every major bridge across the Seine, and the Louvre, target 3 on the demolition sequence, received 847 kilograms of TNT in its sub-basements, enough to collapse the entire western wing into rubble. The problem wasn't the explosives. German engineering was efficient. The charges were placed, the wires were tested, the detonators were armed. The problem was communication, or rather, the deliberate destruction of it. On August 22nd, the SS had systematically cut every telephone line connecting the French resistance to the outside world. They severed cables. They arrested switchboard operators suspected of sympathy. They monitored every remaining connection with stenographers and voltage detectors. The resistance knew the Germans were planning something. They had spotters, informants, brave men and women who watched Wehrmacht trucks deliver crates to monuments at midnight. But they didn't know what was in the crates. They didn't know when the demolitions were scheduled. And they had no way to coordinate a response across a city of 3 million people under military lockdown. Meanwhile, the Allied forces approaching from the west had their own communication problems. They were moving too fast. Supply lines were stretched. Radio traffic was chaos. The Free French 2nd Armored Division under General Leclerc was still 2 days outside Paris, fighting through German rearguard actions. Even if someone inside Paris knew about the demolitions, There was no clear path to warn anyone who could stop them. The telephone network, once the pride of French engineering, copper threads connecting every arrondissement, had become a weapon. The Germans controlled the main exchange. They monitored the trunk lines. They required authorization codes for any long-distance connection. A civilian operator trying to place an unauthorized international call would be detected immediately. The voltage spike alone would trigger alarms. The routing logs would show the attempt within seconds. It was a perfect trap. Information isolated. Authority centralized. Resistance blinded. And in the center of that trap sat Marie Leclerc, 28 years old, wearing a worn blue operator's uniform, staring at a panel of jacks and cables that represented the only remaining thread connecting Paris to the outside world, the trunk lines, international routing protocols designed in the 1920s. Before anyone imagined telephone networks as weapons of war, the old paths still existed. Paris to Reims to Brussels to Ostend to Dover to London, buried under layers of German military priority traffic. Technically, the route was possible. The cables were still intact. The relay stations were still operational, staffed by operators, French, Belgian, German, who followed protocol because that's what operators did. You received a trunk request, you confirmed the routing code, you connected the patch. But there was no legitimate routing code that would authorize a civilian call from occupied Paris to free French headquarters in London. Marie would have to lie. She would have to impersonate German military authority at 4 different relay stations. She would have to maintain a connection for 30-plus minutes, while explosives experts prepared to destroy the most important museum in Western civilization. She would have to do this while Wehrmacht officers walked the floors above her, while SS monitors scanned for irregular voltage patterns, while the clock counted down to 0600 hours. And if she succeeded, if the call went through, if London answered, if the message was clear, there was still no guarantee the resistance could act in time. The charges were already placed. The detonators were armed. The engineers were waiting for the order. 6 o'clock, 72 minutes away when Marie first heard the transmission. Now, as she held the trunk line jack in her bleeding hand, it was 68. 68 minutes to connect 4 relay stations. 68 minutes to warn London. 68 minutes to save 700 years of human memory made stone. The mathematics were impossible, but Marie's father had taught her something else about telephone networks. Something the Germans had forgotten in their obsession with control. The system wanted to connect. That was its nature, copper to copper, voice to voice. Every relay station, every operator, every switchboard was designed for one purpose, to complete the circuit. If she could make the system believe her call was legitimate, it would fight to stay connected. She would just have to be perfect for 30 minutes. While her hands bled and her heart hammered and boots echoed in the hallway, Marie inserted the trunk line jack into the first routing position. The panel clicked. A red light flared to green. Paris to Reims, first relay. Her fingers moved to the authorization dial. She would need a military priority code, one that would pass German verification but couldn't be traced back to any real unit. In her pocket, Jean-Paul's letter crinkled. On the wall, the clock read 0452. Outside, the sky was turning gray. Marie Leclerc learned to read voltage before she learned to read music. She was 7 years old the first time her father hoisted her onto his shoulders and carried her into the belly of the Paris telephone exchange. The year was 1923. The network was expanding. Every arrondissement needed new trunk lines, new relay stations, new operators who understood that telephone work wasn't just plugging wires, it was understanding how voices wanted to travel. Her father, Robert Leclerc, was a master repairman. He could diagnose a faulty connection by sound alone, the pitch of the static, the rhythm of the interference. He'd close his eyes, press the headset to his ear, and say, "Moisture in the line, 40 meters from the junction." He was always right. Marie watched him work, watched his hands move across switchboards like a pianist across keys. Watched him splice copper with surgical precision. He never spoke much, but when he did, his words had weight. "A telephone line," he told her once, "is a promise. Someone speaks, someone listens. Your job is to keep that promise." By age 12, she could wire a junction box. By 15, she understood routing protocols better than most certified operators. By 18, she was the first woman hired at the Paris Central Exchange, not because they wanted to hire a woman, but because she scored higher on the technical exam than every male applicant. The men at the exchange treated her like a curiosity at first, then like furniture. Then, after a few months of watching her handle trunk lines during electrical storms without breaking a sweat, they treated her like one of them, invisible, competent, essential. Marie liked being invisible. It meant she could work without performance. Without pretense, she showed up, she did the job. She did. She went home to the apartment in Belleville where she lived with her father and her younger brother Jean-Paul. Jean-Paul was different. Loud where she was quiet, charming where she was plain. He wanted to be an architect, to design buildings that would make people stop and stare. He spent his wages on sketch pads and drafting pencils. He'd drag Marie to the Louvre every Sunday, not to see the paintings, but to study the architecture. "Look at those proportions," he'd say, notebook out, pencil moving. 300 years old and still perfect. That's what I want to build. Something that outlasts me. She never told him she'd never actually looked at the art. She came for him, to watch him see the world as something that could be made better, more beautiful, more permanent. Then came 1939, then 1940. Jean-Paul enlisted the day Germany invaded Poland. He was 24, too excited, too convinced the war would be over by Christmas. Marie watched him leave from the platform at Gare de l'Est. He was carrying too much gear. His helmet sat crooked. He turned back once, grinned, and shouted, "Save my sketchbooks, I'll need them when I get back." He didn't get back. Dunkirk swallowed him in June 1940. No body, no confirmation, just a telegram that used the word missing like it meant something other than dead. His last letter arrived 3 weeks after the telegram, stained with salt water, creased from being carried in a pocket through mud and smoke. Most of it was mundane. The food was terrible. The officers were idiots. He missed Paris. But the last paragraph was different. "Marie, if something happens to me, don't let them tell you it was for nothing. We're not fighting for land or flags. We're fighting so that something beautiful survives. The Louvre, Notre Dame, the bridges, all of it. That's what matters. Save something beautiful. That's all we're doing." She'd read it so many times the ink was fading into ghosts. When the Germans occupied Paris 2 weeks later, Marie kept working at the exchange, not out of collaboration, out of necessity. The rent didn't stop. Her father's lungs were failing from 40 years of inhaling solder fumes. Someone had to work. The Germans were efficient. They took over the exchange within days. New rules, new protocols, civilian calls monitored, resistance activity punished by death. Operators were required to report anything suspicious. Marie reported nothing. She became more invisible than ever. She learned functional German by listening. She memorized the Wehrmacht's internal routing codes by watching officers dial. She understood the system so completely that she could navigate it without leaving traces. 4 years. 4 years of being a ghost in her own city. Until this morning. Until she heard Target 3, Musée du Louvre. 0600 hours. Now she sat at her switchboard, the trunk line jack in her hand, Jean-Paul's letter in her pocket, and her father's voice in her head. A telephone line is a promise. Someone speaks, someone listens. Marie had spent 4 years listening. Now she would speak. She opened the small leather pouch her father had given her on her first day of work. Inside, wire cutters, a jeweler's screwdriver, and a backup patch cord he'd made himself, wrapped in electrical tape. "For emergencies," he'd said, "when the official tools fail." She pulled out the backup cord, checked the connections, solid. The authorization dial stared at her. She needed a Wehrmacht routing code, something that would authenticate at Reims, Brussels, Ostend, and Dover. Something real enough to pass verification, but obscure enough not to trigger alerts. She thought back. 4 years of listening to German officers dial trunk lines, hundreds of codes. Most were unit-specific, tied to active rosters. Those would fail verification immediately. But there was one category of codes that operated differently. Medical transport, hospital transfers. Those codes were designed to remain active across unit movements, across personnel changes, because wounded soldiers didn't stop existing when their units disbanded. Marie had memorized one 3 months ago. A Wehrmacht medical officer had used it to coordinate hospital evacuations during an Allied bombing run. The code had worked across multiple occupied territories. She didn't know if it was still active, didn't know if using it would trigger flags, but it was the only option that might authenticate long enough to complete the connection. Her fingers moved to the dial. On the wall, the clock read 04:56, 64 minutes until detonation. Marie thought of Jean-Paul standing in front of the winged Victory, sketching proportions, saying, 300 years and still perfect. She thought of her father. Your job is to keep the promise. She began to dial. The dial clicked 7 times. Marie held her breath as the trunk line connection initialized. Static filled her headset, then a tone, the relay signal reaching out across 144 kilometers of copper wire toward Reims. 3 seconds. 5, 8. A voice crackled through. Female. French accent buried under German efficiency. Reims relay station, identify. Marie's throat tightened. She forced her voice flat, professional. Paris Central. Medical transport. Authorization Victor 693 Charlie. Silence. The operator in Reims was checking the code against her authorization log. Marie's hand cramped around the patch cord. If the code had been deactivated, if it triggered a flag, if... Confirmed, the Reims operator said. Route destination, Brussels trunk. Hospital coordination. Another pause, shorter. Connecting. The static shifted. A new tone. The line was holding. Marie exhaled slowly and inserted the second patch cord. Paris to Reims to Brussels. 2 relays down. 2 more to go. But something was wrong. The background noise on the line had changed, not static. Voices, faint, overlapping. Someone else was monitoring the trunk traffic. Her pulse spiked. She glanced at the panel. The voltage indicator showed normal range. The routing log showed only her connection, but the voices were there, murmuring in German just below the operational frequency. Security monitors. They were always listening on the trunk lines, waiting for irregularities. Marie kept her hand steady. If she disconnected now, it would flag as suspicious. If she continued and they noticed the unusual routing pattern, civilian operator accessing medical transport codes at 4 in the morning, she'd have minutes before Wehrmacht security arrived. The Brussels relay clicked through. Brussels, identify. Marie repeated the authorization code. Her German was flawless. 4 years of practice. The Brussels operator didn't hesitate. Confirmed. Route, Ostend Coastal. Priority medical. Connecting. 3 relays. The line was holding, but barely. The static was getting worse. Interference building as the signal degraded across distance. And underneath it all, those monitoring voices, growing more distinct. One of them said, "Log that. Medical code from Paris Central." Marie's blood froze. Then another voice. "Which operator?" "Station 7. Station 7, her station." She had seconds. Maybe less. The Ostend relay clicked through. "Coastal station, identify." Marie started to speak, but a new voice cut across the line. Sharp, male, directly addressing her. "Paris Central, this is Wehrmacht Signal Corps. Who authorized this trunk sequence?" Her mind raced. Hang up and the demolition proceeds unchallenged. Stay on and she'd be arrested before the call completed. She made her choice. Medical Officer Hartmann, Hotel Maurice. Wounded transport coordination. It was a desperate gamble. Major Klaus Hartmann was real, the officer who'd warned her to be gone by 6 o'clock. She was betting he wouldn't be consulted before the call completed. Betting on confusion, on the chaos of a collapsing occupation, on the chance that one more lie could buy her 30 seconds. The Signal Corps' operator paused. "Stand by for verification." The line stayed open. Marie's hand was shaking now. Blood from her cramped fingers making the patch cord slippery. Ostend came back. "Route Dover undersea. Emergency medical." "That's a British line," the Ostend operator said carefully. "Prisoner hospital coordination," Marie lied. "Red Cross protocol." Another pause. Longer. Marie could feel the scrutiny, the doubt, the system beginning to recognize her as foreign matter, something to be rejected. Then the Ostend operator said quietly, in French, not German, "Connecting." The line opened. The undersea cable. The sound changed, deeper, more hollow, as the signal traveled through submarine channels beneath the English channel. Behind Marie, the door to the exchange room opened. She didn't turn around, didn't dare. Footsteps, heavy, military boots. The Dover relay clicked. British operator, English accent. "Dover station, identify." A pause. "This is an occupied territory trunk line." Authorization? Marie switched to English. Her mother had taught her years ago. "Medical emergency, Free French liaison, Carlton Gardens, London." "That's not proper protocol," the Dover operator said, but her voice was uncertain, not hostile, confused. "Please," Marie said, and for the first time her voice cracked. Not from fear, from exhaustion, from 61 minutes of holding impossible weight. "Please connect London. Carlton Gardens, Free French headquarters, it's urgent." The footsteps behind her stopped. Right behind her chair, the Dover operator said, "This is highly irregular." A hand fell on Marie's shoulder. She closed her eyes, a voice above her. "Major Hartmann, operator, what are you doing?" Marie turned slowly. Hartmann stood there, still in uniform, eyes searching hers. Not angry, not yet, just waiting. She could lie. Could say she'd been ordered to make the call. Could implicate him, drag him down with her. Or she could tell the truth. "The Louvre," she said quietly. "They're going to destroy it. 6 o'clock. I'm trying to warn someone." Hartmann stared at her. his hand still on her shoulder. Behind him, another officer was approaching, drawn by the irregular activity. In her headset, the Dover operator, "I need proper authorization or I'm terminating this connection." Hartman looked at Marie, at the photograph of Jean-Paul visible inside her switchboard panel, at her bleeding hands, at the desperation she'd been hiding for 4 years. Then he said to the approaching officer, not to Marie, "Return to your post. Medical emergency. I'm handling it." The officer hesitated. Hartman's voice hardened. "Now." The officer left. Hartman leaned down close to Marie's ear and whispered, "You have 30 seconds. Then I was never here." He removed his hand from her shoulder and walked away without looking back. In her headset, a new voice, British, official. "This is Carlton Gardens, Free French headquarters. Who is this?" Marie's voice steadied. "I have demolition coordinates, Paris, the Louvre, 47 minutes. Repeat that." The voice from London was clipped, disbelieving. "You said the Louvre." Marie spoke quickly, precisely. "Target 3, Musée du Louvre, Rue de Rivoli. 847 kilograms TNT in sub-basement. Detonation 0600 hours, 46 minutes from now." Silence on the line, then, "How do you know this?" "I intercepted German military communications. I'm a switchboard operator, Paris Central Exchange." "You're calling from occupied territory?" "Yes." "Through 4 German relay stations?" "Yes." Another pause. Marie could hear papers shuffling, voices conferring in the background. Every second of hesitation was a second closer to 6 o'clock. "We need coordinates," the London officer said. "Precise location of the charges." Marie's mind raced. She'd heard coordinates in the German transmission, but they were military grid references. The resistance inside Paris wouldn't use German systems. They'd need landmarks, street names, access points. She couldn't say that on an open line. German monitors were still listening. Any specific tactical detail would trigger immediate shutdown. She had to encode it. "The charges," she said slowly, "are in the family home. Rue de Rivoli entrance, basement level. You need to reach Uncle Sully before morning service. The Sully wing, the main basement access. Uncle Sully for the Pavilion Sully entrance." It was desperate improvisation, hoping London would understand. The officer caught it. "Understood. Sully entrance, basement level. What about the bridges?" "Multiple family properties. Pont Neuf, 6:15. Pont des Arts, 6:30. "I don't have complete," the line crackled. Hard static burst through her headset. Marie's heart stopped. The connection was degrading. She slapped the switchboard panel, adjusted the patch cord. The static cleared slightly, but the line was unstable. Too much distance, too much time. Too much strain on cables never meant to carry this weight. "London, are you there?" "Faint. Receiving you. Stand by." More voices in the background. Marie checked the clock. 5:19, 41 minutes. Behind her, the exchange room door opened again. Different footsteps this time. Multiple people. She heard the shift supervisor, Madame Blanchard. "What's going on? Why is Station 7 showing international trunk activity?" Marie didn't turn around. She focused on the headset, on the fragile thread of copper connecting her to the only people who could help. The London officer came back. "We're relaying to resistance contacts inside Paris, but communication is extremely limited. We can't guarantee—" "Try anyway," Marie interrupted. "Please." "What's your name, operator?" She hesitated. Giving her name meant permanent record, meant no invisibility after this, meant whatever happened next, she owned it completely. "Marie Leclerc," she said. "Hold the line, Marie. Don't disconnect." The static surged again. Marie's fingers flew across the switchboard, rerouting voltage, compensating for the failing connection. This was what her father had taught her. How to hold a dying line together through pure technical stubbornness. Madame Blanchard's voice, closer now. "Leclerc, explain yourself immediately." Marie ignored her. In the headset, fragments of conversation. The London officer relaying coordinates to someone else. Morse code clicking in the background. Radio interference. Then a new voice on the line. Deeper, more authoritative. "Mademoiselle Leclerc, this is Colonel Roltangi, FFI Resistance. Your information, if accurate, is invaluable, but we need time to verify and mobilize. Can you hold this connection?" "Yes," Marie said, though she had no idea if it was true. The patch cords were overheating. Her improvised backup cable was fraying at the connection point. The whole system was screaming to shut down. "How long?" Roltangi asked. Marie looked at the clock. 38 minutes until detonation. "We need at least 20 to reach the Louvre. Longer if German patrols interfere." "Then you have 20 minutes, Marie said. "I'll hold the line." Madame Blanchard grabbed Marie's shoulder. "You're terminated. Disconnect immediately or I'm calling security." Marie shrugged off the hand and kept working. She rerouted through a backup relay, borrowed voltage from an unused trunk line, patch the degrading connection through a parallel channel. It was improvisation bordering on impossible, holding 4 relay stations open simultaneously, balancing signal load, keeping German monitors from realizing the line wasn't actually terminated. Her father's leather pouch sat open on the console. She grabbed the wire cutters and stripped insulation from the backup cable, splicing it directly into the primary trunk to bypass a failing junction. Sparks, the smell of burning rubber, the connection held. In her headset, "Marie, this is London. Resistance teams are mobilizing. Estimated arrival at Louvre, 0540. They need to know. Are there guards on the charges?" "I don't know," Marie said. "I only heard the demolition schedule." "Best estimate?" She thought back to the German transmission. The voice had mentioned wire integrity. That implied someone was maintaining the charges. "Assume guarded," she said. "Wehrmacht engineers, probably 2 minimum." "Understood." The clock, 0524, 36 minutes. Madame Blanchard was yelling now, trying to physically disconnect the patch cords. Marie blocked her with her shoulder, hands moving faster than thought, keeping the connection alive through sheer desperate precision. Then Major Hartmann's voice cut through the chaos. "Madame Blanchard, step away from that console." The supervisor turned. "Major, this operator has violated. She's operating under my direct authorization," Hartmann said calmly. "Medical emergency, prisoner exchange coordination. You will not interfere." It was an obvious lie. Everyone in the room knew it. But Hartmann's rank held weight, and his tone left no room for argument. Blanchard stepped back, furious but silenced. In the headset, more static. Then rolled Tanguy. "Marie, the teams are moving, but we need to know, once they cut the detonator wires, will there be backup triggers?" Marie closed her eyes, reaching back through 4 years of intercepted German communications. She'd heard demolition protocols before. "Multiple detonators," she said. "Standard Wehrmacht procedure. Primary electric trigger, backup mechanical fuse. They'll need to cut both. Time estimate to disarm? I don't know, I'm not an engineer." "Your best guess." She thought of Jean-Paul explaining architectural demolition once, how precise it had to be. At least 10 minutes per location, if they know what they're doing. The clock, 0531, 29 minutes until detonation. The teams needed to arrive, access the basement, locate the charges, identify the detonators, and cut both electric and mechanical triggers. The mathematics were impossible, but the line was still open, and Marie's hands, bleeding now, the cracked headset cutting into her palm, refused to let go. At 0554, the line went dead, not from disconnection, from silence. The static stopped. The voices from London vanished. Marie sat frozen, headset pressed against her ear, hearing nothing but the hollow emptiness of a completed circuit with no one left to speak. The clock read 6 minutes until detonation. She didn't know if the resistance had reached the Louvre, didn't know if they'd found the charges, didn't know if her impossible call had saved anything, or simply documented failure in real time across 4 countries. Behind her, Madame Blanchard was already speaking into the telephone, calling Wehrmacht security. Her voice was sharp with vindication. "Unauthorized international trunk connection. Station 7. Yes, I'll hold her here." Marie pulled the headset off slowly. Her hands were streaked with blood where the metal band had cut into her palm during the 47-minute connection. The patch cords lay tangled on the console, still warm from overuse. She thought of Jean-Paul's letter, "Save something beautiful." She'd tried. That would have to be enough. Major Hartmann stood near the door, expressionless. When their eyes met, he gave the smallest shake of his head. "I can't protect you anymore." 2 Wehrmacht soldiers entered at 0557. They didn't speak. One took Marie's arm, not roughly but firmly. The other collected the routing logs, the connection records, evidence of what she'd done. As they led her toward the door, Marie looked back at her switchboard one last time. The photograph of Jean-Paul was still visible inside the panel, his stupid grin frozen in time. The leather tool pouch her father had given her sat open on the console. The clock read 0559, 1 minute. They took her to a holding room in the basement. Concrete walls, a single wooden chair. The soldiers locked the door and left her alone. Marie sat and waited for the explosion. 6 o'clock arrived in silence. Then 0601, 0602, nothing. At 0615 the door opened. Not soldiers this time. Major Hartmann, alone. His face was unreadable. "The charges at the Louvre were disarmed at 0554, he said quietly. "Resistance fighters. They cut the detonator wires 6 minutes before the scheduled detonation." Marie's breath left her in a rush. "The bridges?" "Pont Neuf was partially damaged. The team arrived too late, but the others..." He paused. "Your warning saved most of them." She closed her eyes. 6 minutes. the narrowest possible margin between destruction and survival. Hartman pulled a chair close and sat. I told my commanding officer that you acted under my explicit orders, that I authorized the trunk connection for prisoner exchange coordination. He met her eyes. It's a lie that will cost me my career if investigated. But in 3 days, Paris will be in Allied hands, and no one will care about Wehrmacht internal communications, so the lie will hold. Why? Marie asked. He was quiet for a long moment. I have a daughter in Dresden. She's 8. She collects drawings of buildings, castles, churches, monuments. I saw your brother's photograph. I thought, his voice caught. I thought if my daughter were in Paris, I would want someone to try, even if it was impossible, even if it broke every rule. He stood. You'll be released tomorrow morning. Do not correct my report. Do not claim heroism. Let them think you were following orders. That's how you survive what comes next. And you? Marie asked. Hartman smiled bitterly. I followed orders too, just different ones than Berlin gave me. He left. The door stayed unlocked. Marie was released on August 27th as Allied tanks rolled into Paris. No charges, no record. Madame Blanchard had been arrested by Free French forces for collaboration. The routing logs had been lost in the chaos. Official history would record that FFI resistance units, acting on intelligence from London, had prevented the demolition of Paris. Marie's name appeared nowhere. She returned to her switchboard in September 1946 after the exchange was rebuilt. Different operators, different supervisors, but the same panel, the same copper wires, the same quiet promise. Someone speaks, someone listens. She never told anyone what she'd done. When colleagues asked about the occupation, she said only, I kept the lines connected. In 1967, a curator at the Louvre discovered a declassified British intelligence file, Signal Intercept, August 25, 1944, unauthorized trunk call from Paris Central Exchange. Operator identification, Marie Leclerc. Warning received, 0521. Resistance mobilized, 527. Charges disarmed, 554. Margin of survival, 6 minutes. The curator wrote to Marie, now 61 and retired. Would she visit the Louvre, accept recognition, share her story? She declined politely. In her letter, she wrote only, I was doing my job. The museum didn't need me to see it, it just needed to be there. But she kept the letter, and when she died in 1982, her family found something else. Jean-Paul's final letter, carried for 42 years. The paper nearly transparent from handling, the ink faded to ghosts. Save something beautiful, that's all we're doing. Beside it, carefully folded, was a routing sheet. 4 exchanges. Paris to Reims to Brussels to Ostend to Dover to London. The path of an impossible call, and at the bottom, in her father's handwriting, a note he'd written decades earlier when he gave her the leather tool pouch for emergencies, when the official tools fail. In 1985, French telecommunications workers established an informal training protocol called the Leclerc Standard. It taught operators that technical competence wasn't just about following procedures. It was about understanding when the rules served the mission and when the mission transcended the rules. It was never official doctrine, but it was taught anyway, passed down through mentors and night shifts and quiet conversations in break rooms. A reminder that sometimes the most important connections are the ones you're not authorized to make. Today, if you visit the Louvre, there's no plaque for Marie Leclerc, no statue, no recognition. But in the basement, where restoration work continues in the same chambers once wired for destruction, there's a junction box, old, copper, pre-war. Someone, no one knows who, scratched 8 words into the metal for emergencies. When the official tools fail, and every morning the museum opens. 700 years of human memory, still standing, still beautiful. Because one woman, invisible and competent, refused to disconnect. Sometimes saving the world doesn't look like glory. It looks like bleeding hands on a patch cord. It looks like 34 minutes of impossible precision while boots echo in the hallway. Looks like carrying a brother's letter until the ink fades. Not because you need to remember, but because forgetting would be the real failure. Marie Leclerc never visited the Louvre. She didn't need to see it saved. She only needed to know it was there. What would you risk to keep a promise that no one asked you to make?